see my guest is here. We are joined with the man himself, Ray McGovern. How you doing, Ray? You doing okay this morning?
I'm almost awake, Jamal. Yeah. How
Yeah,
are
it's
you
early. I
doing?
know it's early. I know it's early. I got so accustomed to doing the morning show, I just kept doing the morning show. Ray
Well,
McGovern, he is an American political activist, former CIA officer. McGovern was a CIA analyst from 1963 to 1990, and in the 1980s, chaired National Intelligence Estimates and participated in preparing the president's daily brief. Ray, you have my deepest appreciation for getting up this early and joining me on the show.
thank you.
So let's go to Russia. Let's have a conversation about Russia. So you get drones that seem to be dummies because they didn't have any warheads associated with it or no explosives. During a massive attack on Ukraine, some of those drones, I guess, kept going and ended up in Poland. Poland and Europe screams, "Oh my God, NATO has been attacked." And despite the fact that Belarus gave Poland a heads up that the drones were there and helped shoot some of the drones down, Poland didn't seem to have the capability of air defense. They had to scramble F-35s in order to take down cheap, like the plywood drones.
Right.
This is humiliating, right? This is just humiliating deeply. So now Europe has gone with the narrative, coordinated with the US on this. Oh my God, the Russians have attacked Poland. They've had a massive drone strike on Poland. Again, these were dummies, right? There were no, these weren't attack drones. But that's what they've gone with. And if you're looking on social media, that narrative has resonated in the way that they've behaved and the way that they've effectively acted. And that they call Article 4, where they just go and talk about it. Thankfully, they weren't stupid enough to call Article 5, but whatever. But they are pushing a heavy, heavy narrative that Poland was attacked. Now, my question to you is why? Why are they pushing this narrative so hard? They're not going to go to Article 5, so it's not that. They obviously didn't have the capability of taking them down with air defense. So they're clearly incapable of initiating war with the Russians at this point. So why this level of provocation in the way that they're acting?
Well, very first, Jamal, I think the president would profit from you briefing the president's daily brief today. I mean, you summed it all up beautifully. All I need to say is that the general objective on the part of the Europeans, especially the Poles, is to keep the U.S. in Europe, okay? Without the U.S. in Europe, or even with the U.S. in Europe, there is no air defense worthy of the name, not only in Ukraine, but in places like Poland, and that was made manifest. As far as these drones that had no explosives on them, we call them decoys. Now, why they ended up in Poland, and it seems they did, well, no one really knows. But the Russians have been circumspect. You got to listen to what the Ministry of Defense in Russia has said. They say, "Yeah, we want to, this is something odd. Can't explain it. Let's talk. Let's get together. You Poles and we Russia. Let's talk. We'll see what happened. Maybe prevent this from happening again." Now, the ball's in Poland's court. Are they interested in this, or is this just a big attempt to say, "Oh my God, now NATO's been attacked. Now the U.S. Please, U.S. for God's sake, Big Daddy," as the head of the NATO called Trump, "Daddy, please stay with us. Don't abscond, and for God's sake, pay the alimony and the child support because." It's that simple, it seems to me. The reality is that the U.S. is disengaging from Europe, and that's about the only sensible thing I can cite right now that the Trump administration is trying to do abroad. They realize just listen to Trump every time he speaks. This is Biden's war, for God's sake, Biden's war. And to a large extent, that's true. And then he says in the next sentence, "I just want to stop the killing." Well, there are a lot of people in the world that would really like to stop the killing. And if that's possible by getting together and talking this thing through, why not? So let's see what the Poles do. Let's see what the NATO people, as you point out, at least they didn't invoke Article 5. Article 4 is just to discuss what happened. But this is, in my view, clearly an attempt to keep the U.S. in and warned that, NATO has been attacked for the first time since 1949 when it first set up. A little footnote here.
Uh-huh.
People say, well, why was NATO set up in 1949? Well, because of the Warsaw Pact, because the Russians had. Well, wait a second now. When was the Warsaw Pact? Oh, that came about 6 years after 1949. So who set up what first? Well, NATO was set up, and the first Secretary General of NATO spelled out. His name was Lord Ismay. He was a Brit. Okay, he spelled out exactly why NATO was spelled. You know this. He said, okay, NATO. The whole purpose of NATO is to keep the Russians out, to keep the U.S. in,
Right.
and to keep the Germans down. Because, well, kept the Russians out, kept the U.S. in so far up till this year, and Russia, the Germans, my God, they not kept down. They're making all kinds of hue and cry about how they need to be the most, get this, the strongest armed nation in Europe. My God, I'm old enough to remember the last time they pretended to be that and how the Russians reacted.
Yeah. Yeah, that's terrifying that they're letting the Germans act this way. It's terrifying. And that they're giving them license to act this way is, it's almost like a historical anachronism. They just haven't, it's almost like they have no historical context. I want to play this. Oh, no.
Well, I was just going to add another footnote on that. When I joined the CIA in early 1963, it was very clear who the main enemy was. In Russian, it's the Glavny Vrak, okay? It was Russia. And it was vice versa, okay? Now, that's been the case up until this year. And all the polls, reliable polls, have said we've lost the top spot on main enemy for the Russians. Who's there now? The Germans.
Yeah.
Why? Well, you know why. We know why. But that's very dangerous because you can't say that the Russians have an unreasonable fear of Germany. They have a reasonable fear of Germany. And I spent 5 years working in Germany. I too have a reasonable.
You'd have a reasonable fear of Germany. I mean, they fought 2 wars. Germany invaded, right? I mean, like, it's not throwing Lenin into Russia like a bomb in order to break up the Russian government. Yeah, they have reasons. This is your point. You're right. So I agree with you that a lot of this stuff is aimed at Trump. If you're looking at the social media in the U.S., they're like, Donald Trump is so weak, he allowed our NATO allies to get attacked. And that's the refrain that is coming out. This was Trump when asked about it recently. And of course, the press is going to put it to him because the press loves war. And the idea that Donald Trump wants to leave is just heretical to being an American president. Come on. Okay, let's try to refresh this. Let's try this one more time. And
it's refreshing that happens to you too, Jamal.
Yeah, I hate it. I hate it when that happens.
There he is.
Ground incursion into Poland. Could have been a mistake. But regardless, I'm not happy about anything having to do with that whole situation. But hopefully it's going to come to an end.
Could have been a mistake. Obviously, it was a mistake, right? Like, if Russia wanted to hit Poland, they could hit Poland. They didn't need to send dummy drones in Poland. I think my biggest concern with this is that Donald Trump can be swayed. And if they're screaming at him that he's weak, is that going to be enough to get him to devolve from that position of, look, it was a mistake? And that's what I'm seeing as a mistake.
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's the chief question, really. For 4 years, he was unable to do something with respect to creating a decent relationship with Russia. That was all Russiagate, Russia. You're in Putin's pocket. Yeah, okay. Well, will he be able to rise to the occasion now and to do what he says he wants to do? What the Russians say Donald Trump wants to do? They say that he is sincere. They say that he really wants to do a deal on Ukraine. And we Russians already. Now, the proof is in the pudding. Can Trump do a deal on Ukraine? I'm convinced that the Russians are right, that he does want to do that. But the Russians, like everybody else, have to figure out, my God, all the pressures that Trump feels himself under now. It's almost like his first 4 years. Will he be able to make good on this? We don't know. Meanwhile, attrition. The Russian troops in Ukraine have broken through the lines in Donetsk. Um, they are surrounding one of those major cities, Pokrovsk. It doesn't look like too many more weeks will go by before the Russians will either take over everything east of the Dnieper River, or there'll be some sort of a deal, or maybe both. But the deal is possible because the Russians don't want to take over all of Ukraine. That would be crazy. I mean, you want another Vietnam to be handled by Putin's too smart for that. So there's flexibility in both sides. Well, more flexibility on the Russian side. They're winning. They don't have to make any big concessions, but they keep saying, we have some concessions in mind, not the big ones, but we can deal, and they can deal. Why? Because they don't want to take over all Ukraine. End of message.
But what would that deal be? I mean, because as you make the point, there are two problems. One, can a U.S. president make a deal in this way? Meaning, can Donald Trump lower his hubris level in order to accept effectively a surrender document that the Russians are going to present? And B, what could Putin give up in order to make this deal possible, where they can meet somewhere in regards to come up with some kind of arrangement?
Mm-hmm. Well, the question is how much lipstick the Kremlin has to allow Trump to put that on the pig of defeat by the West, the defeated Ukraine, the defeated NATO and U.S. I mean, it's clear it's going to happen. It never should have come to this point. There was a deal back in April of 2022, for God's sake. Now the Russians have taken over those 4 oblasts. They're not going to give them up. Although, I wouldn't rule out. What the Russians want is a security guarantee that their core interests in that area are taken into account. Okay?
Yes.
That's big. The other thing they want is not only to destroy the Ukrainian army, but to make sure that the fascists, the Nazis that are in power now in Kiev, are gone. It's going to take a while more, but there's flexibility as they see themselves dealing among the edges. Do they want to take over Odessa? Well, Odessa is such a beautiful Russian city. Would they want to destroy that? I don't think so. So there's lots of deals that could be made. It's just that, as you point out, Trump is really between a rock and a hard place. What will he be able to deal? I think he would be, but whether he has the guts to follow through on this, or whether he'll wishy-washy go back and forth as he appears to be doing now. It's 3 weeks since the summit in Alaska. Mm-hmm. The only really interesting thing that's happened since then is not confirmed, but it's a report in Politico, which is well plugged in, this Politico journal, that Eldridge Colby, the big China hawk, has said, we really ought to have a new defense planning guidance, and that would be, hey, clean up our own country and our own neighborhood. And in other words, to put it in metaphorical terms, Eldridge Colby sees us going south, south big time. And he talks about Venezuela, he talks about, So now, is that a retrenchment? Is that a policy? Well, it makes sense. It would be saying on Trump's part, well, all right, I saw what happened in China. My God, we're no longer the preeminent superpower. Let's clean up our own back and our own country. We only had limited National Guard troops and so forth. So let's do that first and make sure these Venezuelans know their place in the world. Venezuela, by the way, by all accounts, has the richest oil reserves on the planet.
Yep.
Now it's hard to process, but it's there. So it's more than just the shooting drug smugglers, 11 of them in a boat. It's more than that. So anyhow, there's a lot to be done in Latin America. I think that this likely that Eldridge Colby change of heart. He wrote the last defense planning guidance about 6 years ago, if memory serves. So if this is the new guidance, well, there'll be extra flexibility on Trump's part to say, with respect to Europe and Ukraine, okay, Vladimir, my good friend Vladimir, let's come to terms here. And besides, this is Biden's war, and I just want to stop the killing.
From your mouth to God's ears. We'll see. I mean, I saw the report from Politico on the document for it. Part of me thought that part of the reason that Europe was so hysterical was because of that report. That they outright panicked when they saw that report. Daddy's leaving. Daddy doesn't want to stay. Daddy's saying, I'm going to get the milk, and just never comes back, right? I will see. I mean, this is going to be a massive sea change for U.S. policy, if it's true. I mean, because up to this point, the U.S. policy has been contain China, contain Russia, et cetera. This kind of foreign direct intervention project that the U.S. has been effectively going with. We'll see. I think, as you point out, the question really does boil down to, can Donald Trump back away from this? And can the Russians help him by putting a lipstick on that pig where he could sell it as if he got something out of what's effectively a failure in Ukraine? I don't know. I don't have an answer for that one. My gut tells me he hasn't done it up to this point. Why didn't he walk in the very beginning? Because if he would have walked in the beginning, just said, this is not my war. This is Joe Biden's war. I said I was going to end it, so I'm out. That seemed that would put him in a much better spot to where he is now, where he's been, 8-9 months entrenched in this war?
The answer, I think, is he was very, very poorly advised by these people that don't know which end is up. Pete Hegseth, Rubio, all these people, they don't know from nothing, as we used to say in the Bronx. And Trump was probably advised, look, you can improve your situation a little bit, give him some more weapons. I'll continue to give him some weapons. I make sure we give him intelligence as well, so those Russians know we're serious. And yeah, you're right. He could have ended not on the first day, but the first week, for God's sake, by simply talking to Putin and saying, look, I'm going to blame this on Biden. Help me figure out a way. How much lipstick do you have to put on this pig of defeat?
Is Zelensky a hurdle to this, or is Trump a hurdle to this?
Well, Zelensky is the fly in the ointment to both. I mean, and he's aided and abetted by those Europeans, the coalition of, I call them the coalition of the lemmings, They've been lemmings, They've been going to the cliff, and if U.S. says, now jump. And, I'm thinking of an old cartoon that was really a smash. I forget where I saw it, but lemmings are on the top of the cliff, and one of them turns to the other and says, do we really have to do this? And the other one says, of course, otherwise we would be a disgrace to the whole race of lemmings from the past. Go off, Now there's no one giving them orders. Now Trump is a deadbeat daddy. Okay, he's not paying child support. His vice president says, as far as Ukraine is concerned, we're done with Ukraine. What does that mean? We're done with Ukraine. You're right. That's why the Europeans are fluttering around saying, my God, we can't. Daddy can't just leave this way. He not only can, but he means to. The question is whether the arms makers and the arms suppliers and the military-industrial complex are so strong in Congress and elsewhere so as to prevent him from doing the one thing sensible, in my view, on his agenda, and that is to make peace in Ukraine.
Could Congress prevent him from doing that, though? I mean, up to this point, Trump seems to have an iron grip on Congress. Could they really?
Yeah, I don't know. It really would depend on how this is presented. If it were a treaty, that could run into real problems. If it
Yeah.
were something less than that, I think that those things can be worked out, particularly if the killing stops. I mean, that should be a big selling point, right? I mean, Jamal, you don't
They
want.
don't. Come on, Ray. You know they don't care about Ukrainians dying. They don't care. I mean, what
So
was it Lindsey
let's.
Graham who said it's a bargain? It's like we give them money, we don't have to put our troops in. Only people who are dying are the Ukrainians. This is a bargain. They don't
Yeah,
care.
we'll fight to the last Ukrainian,
Yeah.
as I think was just the guy from South Carolina said, the senator.
Yeah.
Um, it's just really a scandalous performance. We led people like Zelensky down the garden path. We told them we will support you for as long as it takes, as long as it takes. And now, well, now it's as long as it took. It's over as far as U.S. support is concerned. It's just a matter of time, in my view, before the weapons stop flowing. There were weapons flowing, but I think they were mostly weapons approved under prior authorizations by the Biden government.
Mhm.
So whether the Europeans will face reality now, I think they're contending with us again this week. That's another question, but they have their own instincts here, their own policies to try to defend. France, the government has already fallen 2 days ago. Germany is very labile, as they say in Germany, very sensitive. UK, they keep rejuggling their cabinet, making it even worse than it was before.
Yeah.
So the main European players are in a perilous situation in and of themselves. I don't see anything good that's going to come to Europe from this, except maybe a little peace and a little less need to support Ukraine for as long as it takes.
What do you think their end game is? Because you're right, they're monstrously delusional in thinking that they can carry this on their own, or that the Russians is going to accept basically NATO in Ukraine, the entire point of fighting the war in the first place. Certainly,
Yeah.
they know that this is a loss, and yet they continue to kick that dead horse. They have to have something else in mind. I mean, yes, they could be that delusional, but assuming they're not delusional, what is the thought, or what do you think that they are thinking as the next play to try to keep this war going, if indeed that's what they ultimately want to do?
Yeah. Well, they just want to keep the U.S. in, just keep the Russians out, keep the U.S. in. That's 90% of it. Um, and the other 10% is to keep power. I mean, uh, they can't just say tomorrow, oh, this is a big mistake. We shouldn't have given all that billions of dollars to Ukraine. Look what happened. They would fall, those governments. The people in Germany, for example, they've been told by their new chancellor, Merz, look, social benefits used to be a really big thing here. You could, take 6 weeks vacation, go to the spa. There was all kinds of good, but that's over. We now have to build a lot of arms because of the Russian menace. Now, how long will it take the German people to look at what the Russian menace really looks like and say, well, there was no Russian menace until we overthrew the government in Kiev,
Mhm.
and then when we guaranteed the German president that there would be a ceasefire and there would be no shelling of Russian speaking people in the Donbass, that's when the Russians became very upset. Okay, well, so stop that stuff, okay? The Russians keep saying, Putin himself, look, yeah, we've turned to the east for obvious reasons, but we're still open. I mean, Peter the Great opened the window to the west, right? That was 1700. We don't want to go back on that. We're
Right.
European as much as we're Asian. So let's deal. It'll take a little while, but I think once these Stormers and Mountses and Macrons are gone, the Europeans will have to come to their senses because Daddy is also gone.
But do they know that? Like, we know that because we follow this stuff pretty closely. But do they know that the Ukrainian government under Yanukovych was overthrown in 2014? Do they know
Well,
that the Minsk agreements 1 and 2 were blown off? That the Istanbul agreements were blown off?
mhm.
Like, does German, from my understanding, the European population has been seeded with a huge amount of propaganda, like ungodly amounts of Russophobia. Are they aware of that? And to be fair to Poland, when Poland did the poll, they asked who's responsible. The majority of the population said it was the Ukrainians. They blamed the Ukrainians for the war. So fair enough, but it was a small majority. It was like 35, 37% to 30%, something like that. It was very close margins to it. They would need to know that in order to kind of make that decision, right? And do they know it?
Well, another good question. The answer is no. The German people, French people, English people, Polish, they don't know what's going on because the press, the media is worse than I've ever seen it before, and I've been around for a while, okay?
Yeah.
In other words, I was in Germany recently, and my God, can you believe it that it's worse than the media in the United States? Well, you better believe it because it's worse. And there are reasons for that. You know that various intelligence agencies had their own writers, had their own editors, had their own
Yes.
people at very top positions of the most serious, in quotes, German newspapers and TV channels. So it's going to take a while, but Merz has to be regarded as a real menace to the Russians. And you know, the Russians are going to have to, well, they've already done that. Merz, we know from intercepts between the very top Luftwaffe generals 2 years ago that these missiles that Germany, the Taurus missiles that could could go way toward deep into Russia, that they couldn't be put in Ukraine without the German technicians and the pilots to make it work. Okay, so they know that. Now they said, "Oh, we know what we do. This is Mao's government now. We'll build a factory in Ukraine, right? And we'll show them how to make this stuff, and if we won't be involved." So what the Russians do? They creamed that factory just 10 days ago. Now this is not a happy thing, but how naive, how dumb can you be to think that the Russians are going to tolerate? The Russians have just obliterated, pardon the word, the big base that we're building in Romania. So, I mean, look at the map, for God's sake. Obama himself said, look, the worst thing we can do for the Ukrainians is to give them the idea that they could ever prevail in a war against Russia. So don't give them offensive arms. Well, Joe Biden came in, even Trump gave them some offensive arms. What do we think we were doing? Didn't we look at the map? Didn't we ask the generals? Didn't the generals look at the map? Oh my God, it was so stupid to do this. And, consequential because over 1 million people, young people from Ukraine and from Russia, are no longer alive. Where have all the flowers gone?
Yeah. Obama, another quote to end it on from Obama, never underestimate Never underestimate Joe Biden's potential to F stuff up. To F it up. And this is where we are. Ray, thank you for this, man. Honestly, I know it's early, and I really appreciate you joining me. Ray McGovern. Ray McGovern is an American political activist, former Central Intelligence Agency officer. McGovern was a CIA analyst from 1963 to 1990, and in the 1980s, chaired the National Intelligence Estimates and participated in preparing the president's daily briefing. I wish you were still there doing it, Ray. I think you would do a much better job.
Me too.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jamal.
You have a good one. Be safe.
You too.
All right. Shout out to Ray. Deeply appreciate him joining me.